designation of Syed Salahuddin a global terrorist, a step in the right direction, but certainly not the end. It's just the first step that's been taken. And clearly, India cannot expect the United States to fight our war on Pakistan-sponsored terror. But this does indicate, Pramit, that the United States agrees with India's stance that the current unrest in Kashmir is Pakistan-sponsored terror.
Well, let's put it this way. What I would argue is that what it does indicate is that despite Pakistan's attempts to portray India in the international arena as an oppressor, as a country that has a government that is holding back a group of people within its borders who do wish to be independent, and who has attacked those people brutally, and you know, the stuff about the pellets.
Pramit, the delegation level talks have just started. Let's try and listen into the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
आप दुनिया के सबसे पुराना लोकतंत्र है, हम दुनिया के सबसे बड़े लोकतंत्र हैं, डेमोक्रेटिक वैल्यूज के लिए समर्पित हम दो देश हैं, और हम मिलकर भारत अमेरिका के लिए, अमेरिका भारत के लिए, ये तो सही है, लेकिन साथ साथ अमेरिका और भारत मिलकर के विश्व के लिए बहुत कुछ कर सकता है, और उस करने की दिशा में आपका नेतृत्व बहुत बड़ी भूमिका अदा करेगा। मैं फिर
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the equipment. Ordering equipment from the United States always makes us feel very good. And there's nobody who makes military equipment like we make military equipment. Nobody even close. So we want to thank you very much. And we look forward to the meeting. Thank you. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you, President. Thank you. Thank you, fellas.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Over here. Go ahead. Watch it.
He has ushered out the initial statement made by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the US President Donald Trump at the delegation level talks. So the Prime Minister was flanked by the Foreign Secretary and the National Security Advisor. The US President flanked by his core team on national security. Let's listen in.
इसके लिए मैं बहुत आभारी हूँ, और अमेरिका भारत का एक उत्तम मित्र के रूप में भारत और अमेरिका मिलकर के हमारी साझी विरासत है। आप दुनिया के सबसे पुराना लोकतंत्र है, हम दुनिया के सबसे बड़े लोकतंत्र हैं, डेमोक्रेटिक वैल्यूज के लिए समर्पित हम दो देश हैं, और हम मिलकर भारत अमेरिका के लिए, अमेरिका भारत के लिए, ये तो सही है, लेकिन साथ साथ अमेरिका और भारत मिलकर के विश्व के लिए बहुत कुछ कर सकता है, और उस करने की दिशा में आपका नेतृत्व बहुत बड़ी भूमिका अदा करेगा। मैं फिर
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the equipment. Ordering equipment from the United States always makes us feel very good. And there's nobody who makes military equipment like we make military equipment. Nobody even close. So we want to thank you very much. And we look forward to the meeting. Thank you. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you, President. Thank you. Thank you, fellas.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
जिस आदरपूर्वक मेरा और मेरी डेलीगेशन का स्वागत किया, मान किया, इसके लिए मैं बहुत आभारी हूँ, और अमेरिका भारत का एक उत्तम मित्र के रूप में भारत और अमेरिका मिलकर के हमारी साझी विरासत है। आप दुनिया के सबसे पुराना लोकतंत्र है, हम दुनिया के सबसे बड़े लोकतंत्र हैं, डेमोक्रेटिक वैल्यूज के लिए समर्पित हम दो देश हैं, और हम मिलकर भारत अमेरिका के लिए, अमेरिका भारत के लिए, ये तो सही है, लेकिन साथ साथ अमेरिका और भारत मिलकर के विश्व के लिए बहुत कुछ कर सकता है और उस करने की दिशा में आपका नेतृत्व बहुत बड़ी भूमिका अदा करेगा। मैं फिर एक बार आपका बहुत
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the equipment. Ordering equipment from the United States always makes us feel very good. And there's nobody who makes military equipment like we make military equipment. Nobody even close. So we want to thank you very much. And we look forward to the meeting. Thank you. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you, President. Thank you. Thank you, fellas.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you for ordering military equipment. Nobody makes military equipment better than the Americans. Pramit, so that's the initial comment made by the US president, and clearly very indicative of the fact that is this just restricted to the 22 Guardian drones, or does this perhaps now, in your opinion, also include the F-16's Block 70?
I don't think the F-16 deal is done yet. The government is very determined, from what I've heard, that there will be a very clear and transparent process in choosing the MMRCA replacement contract. And as you know, there are two relatively good aircraft in place. But even if we don't buy the F-16, and we will still be buying, we are buying other American equipment. If you look at what we've been purchased, we bought C-17s, C-130s. We're buying more of both of those. Almost our entire military airlift now is completely American.
The Chinooks, the Apaches.
And we are now phasing out our old Russian helicopter gunships, or Soviet ones really, and now we're going for American ones. Again, on the Chinese border, most of the equipment we're getting now is American. So America, which was almost nothing in terms of defense purchases for India 10, 15 years ago, is now roughly the number one or number two source of weapons for our system. And in the naval side, while we may buy hulls from Russia, a lot of the equipment we're picking up is American. Anti-submarine warfare system, it goes on and on. We are buying more and more American weapons. So I think, if I remember correctly, the Pentagon in a report the last year or the year before said India is now the fourth largest purchaser of American weapons in the world, which means whether or not we buy the F-16 or not, we are still very important for the American market. The other thing to keep in mind about what we buy is that American companies, especially the high technology companies like, let's say, a Raytheon or something, who do electronics and don't actually build aircraft, but they do the software and so on. These companies are highly restricted in who they can sell to, not just in terms of whether the country is a friend of America, but whether that country may potentially provide that technology to another country that is an enemy of the United States. And as a consequence, companies like that, there are only a few, the NATO countries, Israel, definitely not Pakistan. Those companies cannot sell their high-end weapon systems to anybody except a few countries. And India is now one of those countries, which is where we go back to the issue of the Predator, where you're starting to see technologies that countries that normally a country like India would not have access to now being cleared by the United States.
So is this then just a buyer-seller relation, or is this moving to something more concrete? Will they also transfer that technology to India? Will it also, then translate into the Prime Minister's dream of Make in India?
Well, as you know, we are already seeing that on two fronts. One is the use of a very aggressive offset policy, which is saying that even if I buy a piece of American equipment, 50% of the parts and components and the value addition must happen in India or from Indian companies. So Lockheed is already building, even though they got a few helicopter deals, Lockheed is already building helicopter cockpits, for example, I think down somewhere in South India. And you're starting to see more and more American companies come here and build little bits and pieces of the components, at least, which is the first step towards building the full platform. The other part of it was going to be the new defense strategic partnership policy that's been announced. Once that is implemented, what it will effectively say is that a joint venture, a set of joint ventures between a group of foreign and Indian companies will be the chosen, will be the only companies allowed to bid for 6 or 7 specific, very important defense pieces of equipment, like, let's say, submarines or fighters. And in almost all of these partnerships, American companies are predominant, whether it is in fighter aircraft. You just saw before the Prime Minister's visit, you saw Lockheed announce their joint venture with the Tatas. You have a lot of these relationships, General Dynamics, General Atomics, you name it. Almost every American company is involved in these partnerships. So we can expect that once they finally choose which of the joint ventures will be designated strategic partners, it wouldn't surprise me if at least 50 to 60% of them will incorporate American companies along with an Indian partner. So you're going to see a lot of, for the first time, literally overnight, a huge number of joint ventures between American and Indian companies in the defense space, something that was not only didn't exist 10 years ago, would have considered impossible 10 years ago. That's the way we're changing on this relationship.
And this would take us in a league way ahead of Pakistan, perhaps to engage with China better, and that would keep hostilities with China at bay, maybe.
Well, I think when we're talking about the Chinese, for example, on the Chinese border today, what is India putting there? The Apache Chinook helicopters are going there. The M777 howitzer,
yes,
which is a mountain gun. Now, that's coming from British Aerospace, but where is the assembly line actually coming from? It's coming from Alabama. It's an American gun. British Aerospace is 70% American-owned. And it was an American president, Obama, who cleared that deal. We're bringing in the Brahmos cruise missile, which is largely that's an Indo-Russian and Israeli joint venture.
Yes.
But we're bringing in new weapon systems on the Sino-Indian border, and a large number of those are American or have American backgrounds to them. And there's a very clear reason why we're doing that. Anti-submarine warfare. When the Chinese submarines docked in Sri Lanka under the Rajapaksa government, it was the Americans who told us, hey, this is happening, I hope you know this. And then the whole area of cybersecurity, which we can go into. Even when we buy an Israeli weapon, and Israel this fiscal year, will be the #1 arms supplier to India because of some big contracts that have taken place. A large number of the components in those Israeli arms and weapons are American in origin, because Israel is simply too small to build all of the thousands of components that go into every weapon that they make. But they get the permission from the Americans to the Americans, so that's fine. If it's to India, you go right ahead and sell it. And you may remember, go back to the Falcon radar system, our AWACS structure.
Right.
That was originally Israel tried to sell that to China. They got pulled in by the Clinton administration and said, no, you dare not sell the Falcon radar to China because it has American components, and you dare sell that, even the special relationship between Indo-U.S. and Israel is in danger. So the Israelis complained. They said, we have to sell weapons. We're too small a market to sustain a military-industrial complex domestically. And the Americans said, why don't you think about India? And I know Bruce Rydell in Brookings Institution was at that point in the Clinton administration. He told the Israelis, think about India. And the Israelis said, okay, we'll do that. And the Israelis came back and said, the Indians are interested. You're all right with this. And the Americans said, green light. You can sell whatever you want to India. This is not a country that we have a problem with.
But, that's what brings me to the question that this relationship was taking off even once earlier. and then India did the Pokhran 2 tests. So the GE-404 engines for the Tejas light combat aircraft, or the Sea Kings or the Sea Harriers, the Indian Navy was left cannibalizing its aircraft carrier aircraft, and also the Sea King helicopters. God forbid, can that situation one day come back if we don't toe America's line?
Well, the question, I think, for America, and this is why the nuclear deal was so important, the issue was not nuclear. It was never about the nuclear stuff. That was really quite secondary. The real problem was, and as you mentioned, Pokhran 2 resulted, as did Pokhran 1, resulted in technology sanctions.
Yes.
There were over 40,000 dual-use technologies that were denied to India over the nuclear issue. Because of India's not signing the NPT and not signing the CTBT. And America said, well, it's not even a question that we have any choice. It's under international treaty obligation of the nuclear suppliers group. So you will automatically, and the number of technologies kept increasing. They kept adding, each country, not just India, but other countries, and not just America, kept adding more and more technologies to the list. We were being denied. You may know the famous story about Tata. When they bought Chorus Steel in Britain, they took it over, and the British government came to the Tatas and said, you may own this company, but there are technologies, miraging steels, which are designed for high weapon systems, that you are not allowed to sell in your own country. And the Tata said, but we own the company. They said, we don't care. Under international treaty,
yes,
miraging steel that is developed by Chorus Steel, which Tata owns the patents now, cannot be sold to your own home country. That's how difficult it was becoming for Indian companies and India. Weapon systems, companies would come to us, we'd like to sell you this, and say, oh, sorry, we can't sell it to you because we've just been told that's a violation of the NSG. So when Bush comes in and he says, I want to change this relationship, India says, then give us an exemption, a permanent exemption,
yes,
so that you can never go back on this ever again. Prove to us that you're taking this relationship seriously. And Bush says, I'll do it. So that's where we get the NSG exemption. So forever, nobody can ever impose those sanctions on us ever again. And interestingly, you mentioned the GE-404 engine. Where is that engine's latest version anyway? It's in the Saab Gripen,
yep,
which is the rival to the F-16. And interestingly, this is a story of how America's thinking strategically. Theoretically, America could just force us to buy the F-16 by just saying, tell Saab, the American engine, it's a GE American engine, and the Saab Gripen cannot be sold to India. India has to buy automatically there's only one aircraft left on the table. But when Parikar went to America and met Ash Carter, he said, does it matter to you if we decide not to buy the F-16 and decide to go Saab Gripen? Is this an issue with you? And Carter said, no, it's your choice. We don't care. But we want you to just get into the habit of buying weapons. And we have a stake in both. It's fine, but you make the call. We just want you to get whatever you think is best for you. That's the nature of a change in a strategic relationship that we're talking about that was not, I would argue, wasn't present before. So yeah, America makes money out of a lot of this, but they're not actually stopping, let's say, an Israeli company coming in and stealing a contract from an American company, because America's taking the long-term picture and saying, we want you to become a powerful nation. I remember one time I was talking about Bush.
That long-term picture, is it still that US sees India as the pivot to Asia? Does that vision still remain, that Barack Obama's vision? Joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Geeta Mohan. Geeta, does that vision remain, or is the US now recalibrating its relations with China, given the relations between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping?
Well, there is a continuum when it comes to foreign policy, Gaurav. Also the fact that there is a realization that despite the harsh statements and the strong statements against China, the influencers when it comes to the economy is China, and the other influencer is the United States of America. And look at the kind of meeting the two had. So while there are areas of divergences, there are areas of convergences as well. But China certainly is an area of problem, an area the United States of America, the State Department particularly, still continues to think of as a country that could cause trouble for the United States of America, as also for all those countries that are strategic partners of the United States of America in the Asia Pacific. And hence it is very important that there is a balancing of relations between the United States of America and China, as also between India, China, and the United States of America. The Indian side is very clear that on the one hand, while they do need to start cooperating and looking at better cooperation with the United States of America, but there are problem areas that exist when it comes to China, and that really has been an area of concern for the Indian side. What both sides are going to monitor, particularly what China is going to monitor, is on what is it that the statement will say on South China Sea. The U.S. administration is very clear that South China Sea and freedom of navigation is also another priority area for the United States of America, and it seems like that is an area that will be addressed by the Indian side, given that what sources have told India today, Gaurav, is that South China Sea, but unlike the Obama administration, where there was a separate document on South China Sea, that is not going to happen, but there certainly is going to be a mention of South China Sea and the right to freedom of navigation in the joint statement between India and the United States of America.
And on the issue of South China Sea, Pramit, given China's open hostility towards India on the issue of nuclear suppliers group, or not designating Maulana Masood Azhar a global terrorist, isn't it in India's interest to perhaps be in sync with the United States of America, or perhaps Japan or Australia and other countries on the issue of South China Sea?
Well, India, as you said, as we mentioned, we have implicitly supported their position by supporting freedom of navigation. We have criticized, we have urged all countries to abide by the Hague Tribunal and abide by UNCLOS, the United Nations Law of the Sea Convention, which China is obviously in defiance of regarding the South China Sea. So on all diplomatic and political efforts, India has been very supportive of both the American position, ASEAN's position, and Japan's position. Where India has drawn the line so far has been America's requests, at least under the late years of the Obama administration, the last year, where Obama asked us to consider joint patrols with the United States in those areas, entering the areas which China has territorially claimed, unilaterally claimed as its own. And India has recognized that to some degree this is not too dissimilar from what China did with Tibet and later with Aksai Chin. This is a very similar sort of standard Chinese policy, almost identical in many ways in terms of the pattern of behavior. But India's problems have been on two fronts. One, they've asked America, are you absolutely committed to defending the Western Pacific? Because if you remember, Obama in the first 18 months of his administration tried to carry out what was called the G2 policy, where he tried to develop a certain accommodation with China.
Yes.
And almost seemed to indicate that I'm almost prepared to surrender the Western Pacific to you in return for you working with America on other issues. Luckily for us, it didn't work, but not because America decided to drop the policy, but because China rejected it. China just said, we're a superpower, we're the future, we don't need to deal with you as an equal partner. We'll be one day ahead of you. So India said that if America is going to be this unreliable, we will wait to see where exactly or how far your policy is going to be. Now, by the end of the Obama administration, Obama had become increasingly hostile to China. And there's an interview where he gives, and he was asked about China. He says, with China, I have discovered that the more they will keep pushing and pushing the envelope to see when you will stop. They will never stop unless you resist. And so he began resisting, but by then it was the end of his administration. So India's response to Ash Carter's request, which was, why don't you join us, was, we noticed that Australia, none of the ASEAN countries, and Japan, who are your treaty allies, which India is not, are still joining you in your joint patrol, so South China Sea. So we are prepared to do what we are doing now, which is building up India's control and influence within the Indian Ocean against what we expect to be a future Chinese aggression into this area sometime in the next 5 years. But for the South China Sea, we will stay away and maintain a political and diplomatic stance that is supportive. But militarily, America has to show far greater commitment and continuity than it has so far. And you have to persuade your allies to join in the first place, because it doesn't make any sense to us as to why they're not joining in. And you're coming to ask us. I mean, we don't even have a border on the South China Sea.
Oh, absolutely. Right? So, Geeta, South China Sea remains one aspect of this conversation. But as we now take it step by step, let's break this down before that joint statement and before the address by Donald Trump and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Let's once again hear Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Donald Trump. Then we take this step by step.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to have Prime Minister Modi with us as representatives. We've had a lot of discussions already. We're making great progress. The relationship between the United States and India is very, very strong and very, very powerful. We agree on most things, and I would say by the end of the day we'll agree on everything. But I just want to tell you, Mr. Prime Minister, it's a great honor to have you in the United States.
ऐसा करके एक बार पुनः सबके बीच में आपसे मिलने का अवसर फिर से एक बार मिला। मैं आपका बहुत आभारी हूँ। आपने और प्रोफेसर ने जिस आदरपूर्वक मेरा और मेरी डेलीगेशन का स्वागत किया, मान किया, इसके लिए मैं बहुत आभारी हूँ। और अमेरिका भारत का एक उत्तम मित्र के रूप में भारत और अमेरिका मिलकर के हमारी साझी विरासत है। आप दुनिया के सबसे पुराना लोकतंत्र है, हम दुनिया के सबसे बड़े लोकतंत्र हैं, डेमोक्रेटिक वैल्यूज के लिए समर्पित हम दो देश हैं और हम मिलकर भारत अमेरिका के लिए, अमेरिका भारत के लिए, ये तो है ही है, लेकिन साथ साथ अमेरिका और भारत मिलकर के विश्व के लिए बहुत कुछ कर सकता है और उस करने की दिशा में आपका नेतृत्व बहुत बड़ी भूमिका अदा करेगा। मैं फिर एक
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the equipment. Ordering equipment from the United States always makes us feel very good. And there's nobody who makes military equipment like we make military equipment. Nobody even close. So we want to thank you very much, and we look forward to getting on with the meeting. Thank you. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you, President. Thank you. Thank you, fellas.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So the first comment made by the US President Donald Trump in the delegation level talks was, thank you for buying military equipment. No one makes military equipment better. Thank you for ordering military equipment from us. So he really cut to the chase. He came straight to the point, Pramod. Thank you for buying military equipment. That is what the basic thing is all about. And before that, the right noises about Syed Salahuddin made by the US State Department.
Look, Trump is, as I think we all realize, he's not a statesman. He's not a great strategic thinker, and I don't think he actually bothers. He's not particularly bothered that he's not. His knowledge of foreign policy is negligible. He doesn't actually believe America should be involved in a large portion of the world. His entire foreign policy has been built around, and in fact, arguing that NATO, for example, which has been the cornerstone of America's entire global security structure, he's actually questioned it. He said, I don't think NATO makes any sense, that these countries don't, Europe doesn't do enough heavy lifting, and perhaps America should consider dropping out. Now, the rest of his administration had probably rushed in and said, no, it's not that bad. But Trump has continued to talk like that. And he has said the same thing to other countries. He said, I don't think America should really be out there wasting all our time and money helping you if you can't help yourself. So this is a man who doesn't think strategically. It's not his game. He is very clear that my constituency are white working class Americans who are concerned about jobs, who feel that both the foreign policy and the domestic policy of America should be almost completely focused on reviving America's dwindling manufacturing sector and providing the kind of jobs that this class, which is not highly educated and doesn't have many advanced skill sets, needs. So he has focused almost all of his foreign policy trips. He's basically been very quick to say, oh, you're buying weapons. That's nice because that means jobs for my people, or for my voters in particular. When Japan, Shinzo Abe came in, Abe said, I will invest $400 billion of Japanese money building trains and everything else in your country, in America. And Trump was like, that's the most important thing about this trip for me because that's what my constituency is interested in. That doesn't mean there's not a strategic component to the Trump administration, but interestingly enough, he's essentially outsourced that to his ministers. He said people like James Mattis will handle Afghanistan. People like John Kelly will handle Homeland Security. McMaster, my national security advisor, will handle almost everything. And they will make all the decisions, and I will just okay them in the end. Even sometimes when I don't even necessarily agree with the policies, it's like, okay, I'll go along with it because you insist. So for him, I would have been surprised to hear him give a big strategic picture between India and the U.S. changing the world or working towards a pivot to Asia. That's simply not what Trump is about.
But is that what America expects India to be, even under the Trump administration, be the pivot to Asia? He himself may be looking inwards, he himself may be creating jobs, but would his team expect the same of India?
Let's put it this way. So far, we'll see what the joint statement says, but everything that I've heard that the Indian side, when they have gone to meet people like Tillerson, Kelly, McMaster, Mattis, have all come back and said more or less that the strategic sense that we had under Bush, that we had under Obama, of America's desire to build up, to ensure that India becomes a great power, to provide balance to Asia against China, continues to be very much deeply embedded in the American administrative structure. Trump may not necessarily articulate that, but so far we don't seem to have any indication that he disbelieves that that's a bad idea. But he just doesn't really see that as something that he has to worry about. He's like, I've got people. He's like a CEO of a corporation. I've got a man who handles my IT. I've got a man who handles my finance. I've got a vice president who handles HRD. And I can do the same thing with strategy. Why does grand strategy have to be left to me? Yeah. I should just focus about keeping my voters happy.
And so that's why perhaps it's unique that General Mattis is in charge of Afghanistan, of all the Afghanistan policy. And does that then, in a sense, be advantage India, given the fact that there is convergence between India's thinking and Mattis's thinking about the source of trouble in Afghanistan and India is the same? It's terror that comes from Pakistan?
I would think yes. Because keep in mind, you have an interesting situation. Of the 4 key members of the foreign policy team in America today, Kelly, Mattis, and McMaster are all people who have served as soldiers, as officers in Afghanistan.
Yes.
And what used to happen in the past was that these men are officers who saw their own men being killed by the Haqqani network. And they knew that these were being backed by safe havens in Pakistan, that the ISI was doing this deliberately against them. But they would complain to Washington, and the State Department would say, look, we have a big game with Pakistan, so let's not go down that path. We'll just ignore. Now those men are in charge. And everything indicates that they are very clear in their mind that Pakistan was a traitorous nation that backstabbed them when they were in Afghanistan as soldiers and have never forgiven Pakistan for this. So Mattis has come in and he's been told by Trump, look, I don't really care for this war in Afghanistan, but you're the general, you decide. You tell me what to do and I'll do it. I'm not going to even argue with you about it. So Mattis has come in and said, I want to send more troops to Afghanistan. I want to beat the Taliban into the ground because the Taliban has become too powerful. And what does that mean? I suspect we're going to see a lot more drone activity against targets inside Pakistan, ordered by Mattis to support his policy. And I think he'll be backed, and he's going to be backed by Kelly, and he's going to be backed by McMaster, because all of them come in from the same sort of thinking. And ironically, the State Department, the department that has traditionally tried to push in the other direction, is led by a man, Tillerson, who doesn't seem to like his own diplomats and has been massively reducing the number and strength of his department. So my sense would be, you put all of this together, you are likely to see a government that at the administrative level will be not only hostile to Pakistan, is prepared to act on that hostility, which was not the case before.
Okay, but this then brings us to the issue that we have in the past discussed and not been able to come up with a solution, is America remains dependent on Pakistan for the supplies into Afghanistan. So if you commit additional troops for their resources, for the replenishment, you need Pakistan. So how much can you twist Pakistan's tail if you need Pakistan's help for your replenishment supplies into Afghanistan?
Well, the difference, and it's going to be interesting to see how this works out, the two differences that I see today as opposed to the past when it comes to America's troop presence in Afghanistan is, one, the so-called northern transport network through Uzbekistan is now fully functional, which was not the case before. And that now allows a fairly large amount of materials to pass through. But I think more important is that Mattis is very clear. I don't want to sit down and do what George Bush tried to do, which is to try to make Afghanistan into some sort of a modern democratic state, which would require me to conquer every single square inch of this country, and that would require tens and thousands of troops by America to do. All I want to do is be able to help the Afghan army, Afghan National Army, using American Special Force units and drones to defeat or at least force the Taliban to come to the negotiating table from a position of weakness. That doesn't require me tens of thousands of troops. That probably requires, and in fact, Mattis, I believe, has only spoken about, or at least the media reports, has only spoken about 2,000 to 3,000 additional troops. So you're looking at maximum maybe about 12 to 15,000 U.S. soldiers now deployed, special force units, mainly supported by drones functioning in Afghanistan. That's not a lot of troops. And we're not looking at troops with tanks and bombers and fighter aircrafts backing them up. You're looking at commando units backed by drones and satellites. That doesn't require that much supply.
Yes.
And so my sense is that Pakistan, their dependence on Pakistan will be a lot less under this strategy than it was before. And then combined with the fact that they have an alternative through the northern route, I have a suspicion that we will see Pakistan will find it very difficult to leverage this as much as they wish.
You know, Pramit, that's so heartening to hear. That's so heartening to hear, given the fact that Pakistan's been able to get away with murder for decades. Will they continue to do so? Also joining us on the broadcast is Brigadier B.D. Mishra, who's been watching these developments very closely as a soldier. And Brigadier Mishra, if I were to take it from step one, before the summit level talks, the US State Department designates Sayyid Salahuddin as a global terrorist. Is this just symbolic, or do you see something concrete emerging from this?
You see, the issue is that America was not obliged to do it. In any case, they didn't have an obligation to carry forward before the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Donald Trump. And when it was done, it means that on one issue there is a convergence of thoughts and also action to an extent between India and United States, and that is on counter-terrorism. And I think this is a step which you can't call, which cannot be called symbolic. It is a definite step, and also it sends a very strong message to Pakistan that look, you can keep as many terrorists as possible, but there will be restrictions, there will be sanctions, and they will be contained.
Okay.
Now that I think this is a very positive step.
Is this then a big setback to Pakistan-sponsored terror and Pakistan's rant? We've all heard Pakistan's Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif call Burhan Wani a martyr and a freedom fighter. But here you have not just India, but the United States that's called his master, his boss, Sayyid Salahuddin, a terrorist. Does that mean that Hizbul Mujahideen is a terrorist organization? This is not a freedom struggle. It's actually terror being waged by Pakistan on India.
Though Hizbul Mujahideen has not been named in this case, an individual has been named, but it implies that this is a terrorist organization. There is no freedom fighting involved in this, and if this man Salahuddin has been designated as a global terrorist, it means that what he is doing is terrorism and has got no other dimension.
Okay. Geeta, you've been speaking to members of the Indian delegation. We heard Gopal Bagle and he said that it is a positive step. But how is the Indian delegation describing this measure? Sayyid Salahuddin being designated a global terrorist just before the summit level talks.
Well, there are two things. One, the Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson Gopal Bagle, in his press briefing, Gaurav very clearly said that they are looking at the notification, but it is a welcome notification given that India's staff vindicated with the designation of Sayyid Salahuddin as a designated terrorist. Now, the fact of the matter is, Gaurav, that India has been and had been asking the United States of America, requesting the U.S. government to designate Sayyid Salahuddin for a very long time. Now, this comes just ahead of the bilateral talks which are underway between India and the United States of America. We, Gaurav, are here. This is where the press statement between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Donald Trump will take place in some time from now. But the important aspect over here is this, that while the designation has happened, Gaurav, one would want to ask why is it that, and the timing of the designation, why did it happen now? Sources have told India today, Gaurav, that Sayyid Salahuddin will also be mentioned in the joint statement that will follow the press statement between India and the United States of America. And if that happens, it becomes critical for Pakistan then to act against Sayyid Salahuddin, or for that matter, at least look at freezing his funds and his movement. It is also a vindication when India is trying very hard and struggling to find peace and stability in the valley. It is also a statement which very clearly recognizes that the Hizbul Mujahideen chief, and the statement very clearly says militant group Hizbul Mujahideen chief Sayyid Salahuddin as a globally designated terrorist. And that really goes to show that all those who across the border use Sayyid Salahuddin as a man to front the so-called war in Kashmir, and all those who follow Sayyid Salahuddin in the valley are certainly ones that can't be called, or who can't really be called martyrs. And Burhan Wani was his commander. Now, why is it important, Gaurav? Is because Nawaz Sharif, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, the ISPR DG, the army chiefs, they all, in their own respective statements, mentioned Burhan Wani as a martyr. This statement and this designation, particularly the mention of Sayyid Salahuddin, which is what we broke, the mention of Sayyid Salahuddin and the designation of Sayyid Salahuddin is something that really talks volumes of how Pakistan needs to change tactic, else it could lose its most important partner, that's the United States of America. There is, as is there a pressure on Pakistan, there is immense pressure on the United States government, not just from India, Gaurav, but
Okay.
there has been a thinking within, and that's why there's a lot of pressure from various congressmen, from various senators, the
Yes.
Foreign Affairs Committee questioning the state government, State Department on whether if the military aid to Pakistan should continue or not. And
Their
that's
own soldiers.
has translated
Yes.
into this designation.
Their own soldiers, their own generals who are now very powerful people in the new U.S. administration. But Pramit, the question is, in the past, Pakistan has been so-called isolated. That hasn't worked. Will this push Pakistan deeper into China's lap and make this effort counterproductive?
Well, I'm not too sure China can that Pakistan can get any more closer to China. They're already about 70% of the weapons systems in the Pakistani military are Chinese. Their nuclear arms are Chinese. Their strongest diplomatic support in the United Nations and anywhere is China. And with the announcement of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, China will effectively control the vast bulk of the industrial infrastructure of Pakistan and be their single largest trading partner, their single largest investor, and will control huge chunks of the country. So when people say this, that we will drive them closer into China's arms, I said, well, China, barring literally taking over the entire country as a outright colony, there's not much more that China can do. If you look at the China Development Bank original plan that was printed in Dawn, the Pakistani newspaper,
yes,
for the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, it actually says, among other things, that Chinese should have visa-free rights to travel to Pakistan, but Pakistanis would not have similar rights into China.
Yes.
So you have already a state of affairs where China is already treating Pakistan as effectively a puppet state, which Pakistan seems to be quite happy to accept, at least the military and the political leadership. So I don't see that being much of a problem.
But will the U.S. lose more leverage with Pakistan if the U.S. tightens the screws, or you expect the U.S. to tighten screws even further now?
Let's put it, the trajectory right now is that as America's troop presence in Afghanistan has now dropped to less than 10,000 soldiers, the Americans have anyway been slowly cutting back, in fact, quite rapidly cutting back on their economic and military aid. At one point, they were giving $3 or $4 billion a year, if I remember correctly. Now it's the last amount designated was less than $1 billion, about $900 million. So you need, so you're already seeing that. In fact, the Chinese themselves, when I've gone to China and I've talked to Chinese think tanks and officials, and I said, why are you doing this economic corridor? And one of the arguments they say is that because America is leaving, we have to fill in that vacuum to stabilize Pakistan. So they already believe that is happening. The point is that one of the consequences of Trump himself not having a very large or a very active strategic mind or vision of the world, it also means automatically that he doesn't actually see much point in Pakistan either. He's not all that concerned about American interests in Pakistan because he's not clear what they are.
Yeah.
So that also works in our favor. And Pakistan has lost a number of its closest friends. United Arab Emirates was one time one of the Dawood Ibrahim, the Taliban. All of them had received so much support and backing from places like Dubai. They've lost that. The UAE has completely cut them out and basically turned to India and said, you're our future partner, forget the Pakistanis.
Yes.
Privately, you talk to members of the Saudi royal family and the foreign ministry and so on. They say that Pakistan, we made a fundamental mistake in the 1980s by aligning with Pakistan. We accept that now. Pakistan has not come out to be what we had thought it would. And you saw recently Iran accusing Pakistan
yes.
Of being behind the killing of 12 border guards on their border. When Modi went to Central Asia, visited 5 Central Asian countries, all of them happily signed counterterrorism agreements which are aimed at Pakistan. when you look at all of this, you say to yourself, Pakistan, amazingly, is a country that in which not one of its neighbors, other than China, seems to have a particularly fondness for it.
And the fondness, Brigadier, Mishra, that China has for Pakistan is only because the two have a common enemy. Both of them are very hostile to India. And that is why Pakistan is willing to be China's client state. It's cutting its nose to spite its face.
I think dimension is slightly different. You see, point is that China has invested so much of money in Pakistan. Their one belt, one road concept and the project, that is that's a very important thing for China. And now I read the statement, and there are about 16,000 troops of Pakistani. They are guarding the Chinese interest there. And certainly after these two people were killed, the two Chinese were killed. Now, you see, the issue is that there is a very deep design of China towards Pakistan, and the time is not far away when the entire area, starting from Xinjiang, where the road starts,
yes,
and right down to Gwadar, there will be cantonments of Chinese coming. Even if America keeps on looking after the interest of Pakistan, Chinese will dump more and more money, more and more infrastructure, more and more projects, because over a period of time they will find it very convenient to have their own cantonments along that road, starting from Baltistan and starting from Gilgit.
But should that happen, Pramit, do you also see that happen? More Chinese military presence, not just in Pakistan occupied Kashmir, but all along the China-Pakistan economic corridor?
Asking me?
I think I think I was, for me, I think I would tend to agree in the sense that as the threat perception of China, and you may notice that, in fact, I think the director of the National Intelligence Council of America said that the building of CPEC will produce a lot more targets for terrorists. So if I am the Tehrik-e-Taliban, which is fighting the Pakistani government, I would immediately think to myself, what a wonderful thing. I can go and attack all of these targets on this economic corridor, kill Chinese, as has happened in the past. And what will happen is that the Chinese will almost certainly tell Pakistan, you're not being able to provide the security that we wanted. Therefore, we will have to bring in our own soldiers to provide that security. And I gather private security contractors from China are already being brought in. And you may remember earlier when China was trying to repair the damage that was done in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir after that giant Kashmir earthquake.
Yes.
They also sent in several hundred troops, and I think a total eventually reached about 3,000, to defend Chinese engineers from local insurgents and bandits, because they decided that the Pakistani army soldiers were too undependable. So you have an inevitable, I think, likelihood that given the instability of Pakistan, the almost certain inability of Pakistan to defend literally what will be tens of thousands of Chinese workers and engineers who will be flooding or already entering the country, that China will inevitably start to send in more and more soldiers and security forces to defend their own people.
What would that mean for India then?
I think India will rightfully complain and be concerned that this is now a very clear movement towards a military colonization of Pakistan, because the sense will be that these troops, once they come, will never leave. But it'll be the establishment of a permanent naval base in Gwadar, which will make it very clear to us that China has no interest in withdrawing from Pakistan, and this will now become a permanent Chinese presence in the Indian Ocean and in South Asia. And therefore, and we can already see what is happening is that India is responding, or trying to respond, by building its own alternative infrastructure in the Bay of Bengal, the north-south infrastructure corridor in Iran to Central Asia. We have already talked about and will probably formally announce sometime in September, when Prime Minister Shinzo Abe arrives in his state visit, an Indo-Japanese Africa Economic Corridor, and even in areas of Southeast Asia. In fact, Japan has proved to be the country that has arrived on the scene and said, we accept the argument that you make, that One Belt, One Road is effectively a plot or an attempt by China to change the geopolitics of the Eurasian landmass through infrastructure. Yes. And we are prepared to help and build a counter to that. And unlike you, we have the money and we have the technology. And the combination of your diplomacy and your influence and our money and our technology, we can match the Chinese.
So that great game is on. Where is America, Geeta? If you're still with us, Geeta, where is America in all of this with a president who's rather inward looking? Geeta, if you can hear me, we're talking about how India and Japan may together try and counter China's increasing influence, not just in South Asia, but South Central Asia, in this region where China is trying to build the One Belt, One Road corridor. Where do we see America in all of this? Okay, we'll have to wait a moment before we can try and reestablish that line with Geeta Mohan in Washington, D.C. But Pramit, if I could put that question to you, where does America come in all of this?
The Belt Road Initiative Forum that Xi Jinping attended. They tended to see it as a business opportunity. But what for America's game is with us is really on the defense side, as well as private sector investment. The point is that American government doesn't build infrastructure anymore. And it's important to realize that they don't actually do that kind of stuff. They don't build airports, and so the American government doesn't do that. There are virtually no state-owned enterprises in America. It's the private sector that does that. So America will be basically, if you want certain technologies, if you want our companies to go there, but that's a commercial game. Where America's strategic game would be is effectively to work with India on the defense side, that we have the technologies and we have the capacities. And it is also important to realize that one of the reasons why Japan is working with us is because their closest ally, the Americans, have told them to do so. I'm part of a track-through dialogue, strategic dialogue with the Japanese.
Okay.
And it was very clear from the beginning, the Japanese said, we're here because the Americans have told us to be so. That has now developed. The Japanese now have their own interest in doing so. But at the very beginning, the Japanese are very hesitant. They said, we're not certain that you're the kind of country we can work with. But the Americans have told us to go out there and do this.
Okay. So very, very interesting. And, the various nuances of diplomacy and the great game that's on in this region. In the Rose Garden, the stage is set for Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the U.S. President Donald Trump to address the media. Geeta Mohan on Ground Zero. Geeta, how long now, and what's the big headline likely to be apart from Syed Salahuddin?
Yeah, it's in Delhi.
Well, Gaurav, moments from now, the two leaders will be stepping out. The talks just got over. That's news just coming in, breaking on our network. The talks are over between India and the United States of America. There you see the Indian side is already out. That's the Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson, as also the senior officials who've already come out and taking their seat. And in some time from now, you'll see the American side also coming and taking their seats. And then we will see the leaders, President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, coming out of that door to make their press statements. A very crucial come about in moments from now. It is a positive meeting, is what we should be looking at, and the meeting, the designation of Syed Salahuddin just ahead of the meeting itself goes to show that India's concerns were recognized by the American side, and hence the designation. Right now, we are also given to understand that that very same man could be named in the terrorism paragraph, which will be a very strong paragraph, in the joint statement that will come a little later after this press statement. The two sides, the talks are over, Gaurav, and the two sides, the officials are coming out, but the two sides, the leadership of the two sides, that's Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Donald Trump, to step out in moments from now. That you can see is the First Lady, who's just arrived. She would be seated, and then we have the Vice President and the senior leadership of the United States of America. They've just arrived. Lisa Curtis. That's Lisa Curtis. Those are the officials who've come. The First Lady, that's the Ambassador of India. So the talks are over, and the two sides have come out. The officials of the two sides have come out. In moments from now, we will see the President and the Prime Minister, Gaurav, coming out to make that statement. Very, very, it seems like from what we look and what I can fathom is that the talks went well, and the press statement will be a very short, brief press statement by both the leaders, and will completely sum up what the ties between India and the United States of America from here on would look like.